In this lesson, I will talk to you about different types of clay that are available to buy, and I brought here some examples of such clay, and I'll tell you some things about their characteristics. Let's begin with the most famous clay, the polymer clay. This type of clay is the clay that we put into the oven. And I brought here Fimo clay and Arctic clay. So these are two types of modeling clay. Both need to be put into the oven. And this type of clay usually hardens at 15 minutes, this one, and this one at 30 minutes in the oven. And the temperatures that we have to have in the oven are different, and we see the temperatures here. For example, this type of clay needs to be baked at 110 degrees Celsius and 230 degrees Fahrenheit, and it also says the 30 minutes that I told you about. We have to keep them 30 minutes at this temperature in the oven. Other types of Fimo need a different temperature. For example, this type of Fimo needs 130 degrees Celsius and 265 degrees Celsius and also 30 minutes. Whereas the Arctic clay it says here must be cooked at 140 degrees for 15 minutes. So if you have a combination of Arctic and Fimo, if your item, the item that you have created is a combination of these two types of Fimo, then you will cook them for a time that is in between the two times indicated here, the 15 minutes and the 30 minutes, and the temperature should also be in between the two temperatures indicated on the box. As you can see, the polymer clay has different colors. There are neon colors, there are neutral colors, there are colors that include also gold flakes or silver flakes. This one has gold flakes. They can imitate, for example, this one imitates granite, so the stone, or the leather. This one is leather effect, so it imitates the leather. And they have different textures. This, for example, is soft, whereas this one is the normal one that is harder. And you also have Fimo for kids. The bag of Fimo for kids is smaller, so this one has 42 grams, whereas this one has 57 grams. And this one is also softer, the Fimo for kids. We also have translucent colors. For example, this translucent green. So after we bake this type of clay, it will become translucent. And regarding the characteristics of this clay, you should not exceed the 30 minutes of hardening time. In the oven, you should use a domestic oven thermometer, a bimetal, in order to measure the temperature. You should never use a glass thermometer when you put the Fimo in the oven. You should never harden those items in the microwave. When you put your Fimo into the oven, you should not cook food at the same time. You should not let the product come into contact with an open flame or something that is hot, such as a hot knife. And after you have cured the items that you have created, you should clean the oven very carefully and clean all your equipments, the table and your hands. And while you work with this type of clay, you should not drink, eat or smoke in the area. You should avoid this clay to come into contact with furniture or floors or carpets or fabrics. It should not get into contact with polystyrene or PVC. And when you want to store the Fimo after you have used a part of it, you should put it in a cool and dry place, wrapped in aluminum foil or polyethylene bags. And you can throw them away with the normal garbage if you want, because they are safe. Once they have, if you have put them into the oven and you have taken them out, you should let them first of all cool to the room temperature, and after that, after they have completely hardened and cool to the room temperature, you can begin with the finishing of this type of Fimo, with painting, varnishing, drilling or polishing. And you can also use epoxy glue to repair the broken parts or attach metal parts if you want, for example, to make jewelry. Now let's talk about another type of clay, the air dry clay. It comes in different colors, white like this one, or in the terracotta color like this one. This is one of the most famous types of clay, the white clay, the dust clay. So it comes both in terracotta and in white. And when you create items out of this type of clay, you do not need to put them in the oven because they dry in the air. It is very important to prepare this type of clay properly. It should be kneaded to make it smooth and soft, and that means that you condition your clay. Through conditioning, you combine all the tiny platelets in the clay, and they are spread evenly to make the clay more workable. To minimize the cracking in the case of this type of clay, you can use a wet mix of clay and water. So in some cases, when the clay dries, you may notice that some small cracks appear in your clay. The reason why this happens is because the clay dries, the moisture evaporates, and the clay will begin to shrink, and this will lead to the appearance of fine cracks. In order to correct these cracks, to remove these cracks, you should let the clay dry out completely, and once the clay is dry, you should create a mix of clay and water, and you should use the same type of clay that you've been working with so that the color is the same and the texture is the same. And with this mixture of clay and water, you should cover the surface of the item that you have created to fill in the cracks. After you filled in all the cracks that you've seen on the surface, then you can let the clay dry again. And this way the surface of your items will be very smooth and no cracks will be visible. If you do not use your entire piece of clay at once, because as you can see, this piece of clay is rather large, and if you make small items, like for example small food items out of clay, or small ornaments or jewelry, then you cannot use the entire piece of clay because it's too large. So in this case, you should store the remaining parts in an airtight container. You should wrap first of all the package in cling film and then put it in the airtight container and store it in a cool and dark place. Nevertheless, even if you store it this way, it will slowly start to dry out, but it is nevertheless one of the solutions not to waste the clay. So for a period of time it will be still soft and workable. If you make a larger item and you cannot finish it in one session, then in order to keep the piece workable for next session, you can wrap it in a damp tea towel and then wrap it in cling film so that you make it airtight. If you use this method properly, then the clay will stay workable for several days. In order to make this type of clay waterproof, you should use a paintbrush to cover the entire item with acrylic gloss or a mix of PVA glue and water. You should let this dry and then give the item that you have created a coat of grey acrylic paint. The acrylic paint will help seal the air drying clay to protect it from moisture. After the grey coat has dried, you can give it 2 coats of the final colors that you want to use. So these are a few rules related to this type of air dry clay. Now there is another type of air dry clay, this type. As you can see, these are very saturated colors. This type of air dry clay is the Ultralight clay, which is a type of paper clay. It is very light and very soft, and it has these saturated colors, these very intense colors, and you can make a lot of small items out of this type of clay. You can make foods out of it. You can make small animals or cartoon characters, and they look very shiny. They already have these intense colors, and you can create mixtures of colors. And if you want to give a certain color shade, you can also use soft pastels to create certain color shades on the items that you have created. You can also use acrylic paint and mix it with the clay in order to create other colors. So these were some of the types of clay that I wanted to show you, and I've also given you a few details about their characteristics and about how they can be used in order to create different small items. You can also create jewelry out of them. It is totally, it depends totally on your imagination.